standing in a place where nobody really gets access. 8,000 warriors buried over 2,000 years ago. One of the greatest wonders of the world. If they find things like this here, 30 feet below the surface, you gotta wonder what else lies beyond.
8,000 clay soldiers, standing in perfect formation, underground, unchanged for over 2,000 years. Every year, millions of tourists walk to the edge of those pits, stare down, and believe they understand one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history. They are wrong, and the man who proved it did not use a shovel.
He and his team have been analyzing the tomb complex, using core sampling, ground-penetrating radar, and remote sensing technologies.
He used technology originally designed to find hidden threats in active war zones, and what his scanners pulled out of that ancient earth did not just rewrite the history of one tomb. It rewrote the history of what one man was willing to do to hold power forever. His name is Albert Lin. He is a National Geographic explorer and a combat-grade scanning specialist. And when the Chinese government finally gave him access to sections of this site that no foreign researcher had ever been permitted to enter.
Timeline of East-West communication and rethink that.
Absolutely, that's right. These warriors force us to reconsider how East-West contact started.
What he found underneath the clay army stopped his entire team cold, because the Terracotta army is not standing there to honor a dead emperor. It is standing there to make sure no one ever finds out what is underneath it. So here is the question you need to hold in your mind for the next several minutes. If the world's most famous burial site was actually designed to hide something rather than celebrate someone, what exactly is it hiding? The answer is worse than you think. The emperor who refused to die. To understand what Albert Lin found, you have to first understand the man who built it. Qin Shi Huang was the first emperor of a unified China. That title alone should tell you something about the scale of the person. Before him, China was a collection of warring kingdoms constantly tearing each other apart. He ended that. Through a combination of military genius, political ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to accept any limit on his authority, he forced those kingdoms into a single empire under a single ruler, himself. That kind of man does not think in small terms. And when he turned his attention to death, to the idea that after all of that, after building something no one before him had ever built, he was simply going to stop existing. He did not accept it the way other people accept it. He decided to solve it. For decades, he deployed the full resources of the most powerful empire on Earth in search of a potion that could extend his life indefinitely. He sent scholars on expeditions. He consulted alchemists and mystics from every corner of the known world. He consumed substances that his own advisors told him were dangerous, because those substances were supposed to grant immortality and danger. In his calculation was a reasonable trade. None of it worked. And the failure of that search tells us something important about the tomb he built. Because when his immortality project came back empty, he did not give up. He redirected. Some historians now believe the Terracotta army complex was not designed as a burial site at all. It was designed as a mechanism. A vast, precisely engineered ritual machine built to accomplish what the potions and the mystics could not: pull his consciousness back across the line between death and life and return him to a world that would still be his. Think about what that means in practical terms. It means every single detail of that underground world was placed with intention. The clay soldiers do not face inward toward the emperor's tomb. They face east toward the territories of the nations he spent his life conquering. He was not resting in that position. He was holding formation, ready for whatever came next. It means the complex extends far beyond the pits the tourists visit. The full underground footprint covers thousands of acres. There are clay stables down there, bronze tools engineered so precisely that they remain structurally functional 2,000 years after they were set down. Clay animals, clay farm equipment, clay approximations of every object required for daily life, because his spirit was going to need all of it. It means the model rivers of liquid mercury flowing through a scale replica of his palace inside the burial chamber were not decoration. They were components of a machine designed to do something that has never been done before or since. Here is the question that historians have been quietly wrestling with for decades. If a man with that level of obsession, with that level of paranoia, with that level of resources, and that level of willingness to destroy anything that threatened him, if that man spent years constructing the most elaborate burial complex in the history of human civilization, what was he actually trying to protect? Albert Lin went in to find out, and what the ground gave back was not what anyone had prepared for. The investigator. You need to understand what made Albert Lin different from every researcher who had worked this site before him. The Terracotta Army was discovered in 1974 by farmers digging a well. Within a few years, it became one of the most intensely studied archaeological sites on Earth. Generations of Chinese researchers spent their careers mapping, cataloging, and analyzing everything the accessible pits contained. But there was a limit. And that limit was not about budget, or expertise, or technology. It was about access. The most sensitive sections of this site have been under strict government control since the moment the discovery was made public. The airspace above the complex was effectively classified. Drone flights required authorization from the highest levels of government oversight. Even Chinese archaeologists, with decades of documented experience on this site, often worked without knowing what lay beneath their own feet, because the information was deliberately compartmentalized. Different research teams knew different pieces of the picture. No one outside an extremely small circle knew the complete layout. The secrecy was not incidental. It was structural. Albert Lin somehow secured permission to go where no foreign researcher had ever been allowed to go. The specific mechanism by which that permission was obtained has never been fully explained publicly, which is itself a detail worth noting. When his team arrived at the site, the atmosphere was immediate and specific. Officers in uniform were present from the moment they landed. Every piece of scanning equipment was examined before it was permitted inside the perimeter. Every drone flight required a separate formal authorization request. Every time his instruments went active, someone in uniform was positioned directly behind him, watching the data as it appeared on screen in real time. These are not the conditions of a research project. These are the conditions of supervised access to something that someone very powerful considers sensitive. Lin has worked in environments like this before. His scanning instruments were originally developed for conflict zone applications, finding buried threats in places where the stakes of missing something are immediate and fatal. He knows what it feels like when a space is charged with that kind of tension. He said afterward that standing at the center of the Terracotta Army complex felt like standing inside something that was not constructed for living people. That observation is not poetic license. It reflects a specific, documentable reality about the space, about what that complex actually is. 8,000 individual human-scale figures, each one unique, each one crafted with a precision that modern engineers still struggle to fully explain, surrounding a sealed chamber that has not been opened in 2,000 years. You are standing in the largest organized display of human effort ever directed toward a single buried location, and you are standing above whatever that effort was meant to conceal. Lin moved his instruments through chambers that had been sealed for 22 centuries. The clay soldiers rose in every direction around him. Some posed in a way that reads almost like anticipation, as though a fraction of a second separates them from motion. Bronze swords still capable of drawing blood today. Carriages with structurally sound wheels. Clay horses frozen mid-stride. Every pit was a stopped clock. The hands had not moved in 2,000 years, but Lin was not there to look at what was visible. He was there to read what was not. His ground-penetrating radar systems fired precisely calibrated pulses of energy into the earth beneath his feet. When those pulses struck a solid object, a wall, a floor, a buried mass, they returned to the surface and assembled a picture built entirely from shadow and echo. When the first images appeared on his screens, the team went quiet. What the scanners found. Ask yourself this before we go further. If you had just spent years constructing the most elaborate underground complex in human history, and you knew that somewhere down the line, someone with the right equipment would be able to see through the ground, what would you bury so deep that even the scanners might miss it? Lin's radar showed walls that do not appear on any existing architectural map of the site. Vertical shafts driving straight down more than 100 feet, and clusters, dense, irregular, tightly packed clusters of shapes that no one on the team could immediately identify. Two theories emerged immediately. The first was that these clusters were personal possessions, objects from the Emperor's daily life reproduced in permanent materials, so they would survive the millennia. The kind of things a man obsessed with eternity would want within reach. The second theory was darker, and the more the team analyzed the data, the harder it became to dismiss. Some researchers believe that what Lin's instruments were reading was not objects at all. They were reading people. Not clay representations of people placed there symbolically to serve in the afterlife. Actual human beings placed there in person to serve in the afterlife, exactly as they had served in life. The historical record states that 700,000 people were conscripted to build this complex. 700,000. The construction spanned decades. Workers arrived from across China. For generations, historians assumed they were sent home when the work was complete. The scan data suggests a different answer. Lin then flew. He became the first person ever permitted to fly scanning equipment above the Emperor's burial complex and map it from altitude. The tool he used was LiDAR, a laser-based imaging system that cuts through surface material and vegetation to render buried structures with extreme precision. From above, the true scale of what lies underground became visible for the first time. Buried walls extending far past the boundaries shown on any existing plan. Collapsed chambers that have never appeared in any previous research document, and multiple locations where large numbers of people appeared to have been placed into the ground at the same moment. Some of those locations carried thermal signatures absorbed into the ground itself, evidence of intense, ancient heat events, fires, preserved in the earth for 2,000 years. Then the team found the section that stopped everything, deep below the clay soldiers, beneath their feet, beneath the floor of the pits, beneath the level of everything anyone had previously documented. The scans revealed clusters of disturbed earth, irregular, chaotic in a way that no planned architecture produces, but organized in a way that no natural geological process produces either. The pattern was something forensic archaeologists recognize without hesitation: mass graves. The soil in those areas had been compressed and fractured in a specific way. Not the gradual, even weight of centuries of earth settling. Something violent, something sudden. Fracture lines running through the stratigraphy. Dense shapes below the surface corresponding to human remains scattered across a wide area. Lin looked at the readout and did not speak. He had processed difficult data before. He had worked sites where the gap between what you expected to find and what you actually found was significant. This was different in kind, not just in degree. If even a fraction of those 700,000 construction workers were sealed underground when the project was complete, if the Emperor used the construction program as a tool for eliminating anyone who had seen too much, learned too much, or simply outlived their usefulness, then the Terracotta Army stands above one of the largest mass burial sites in the history of our species. The ancient accounts say the tunnels were sealed from the outside. The soil disturbance patterns are consistent with what forensic geologists call struggle layers, earth that has been mixed and compressed by bodies in motion, not bodies being placed, bodies moving. And in the lower strata, the scans detected something else: metal signatures, dense, scattered components matching the described profile of mechanical crossbow traps, devices engineered to fire on anyone who entered the sealed passages without the right credentials. Ancient accounts describe these mechanisms in detail. Most researchers assumed the wooden trigger components would have disintegrated over 2,000 years. The bronze components did not disintegrate. Then LiDAR found something that no previous research had ever detected. Directly beneath the main burial mound, hidden so completely that it is invisible from the surface under any ordinary inspection, a pyramid structure of densely packed earth, a secret inside a secret. Whatever the emperor considered most critical was buried underneath. Everything else, protected by mass graves and clay soldiers and the accumulated weight of millennia. The rows of warriors above are not arranged for ceremony. They are arranged as a seal. The prince in the dark. Near the center of the scan data, the team identified something that did not fit the surrounding pattern. Beneath the organized geometry of the known chambers, there was a single isolated void, older than the structures around it, dug significantly deeper, as though the person who designed it specifically wanted it beneath everything else, invisible from above, inaccessible from the sides, forgotten as a matter of deliberate engineering. Inside that void was one skeleton. This person was not discarded the way the others were. The remains were arranged with care. The bones belonged to a young man, likely in his early 20s. The objects found in proximity to the skeleton were not the belongings of a laborer, a craftsman, or a prisoner. They were expensive, high status, the kind of objects produced for someone born into significant power and accustomed to holding it. And then the imaging revealed what was inside the skull, a bronze arrowhead, driven into the bone. This was not residual debris from a battle fought nearby. This was an execution, precise, deliberate, carried out on someone who had then been buried separately, carefully, and in a location specifically engineered to make certain no one would ever find him. Let that sit for a moment. Someone took the time to bury this young man with his expensive possessions, with care, and then buried him underneath everything, under layers of earth and clay soldiers and the graves of thousands of workers, not to honor him, but to erase him so completely that even the burial could not be found. Who does that to someone they are trying to honor? Ancient records from the period document the sons of the first emperor extensively. Princes raised inside a court where power and paranoia coexisted in equal measure, where trust was a liability and loyalty was always provisional. Several of those princes disappear from the historical record without any stated explanation. Their names appear in documents across multiple years and then simply stop. No record of death, no record of exile, no documented disgrace, just a silence where a person used to be, as though someone had instructed the record itself to forget them. The location of this burial relative to the central mound, the quality of the grave goods, the depth, the extraordinary precision of the concealment, assembled into a picture that no one in that room was comfortable accepting. This was not a worker. This was not a prisoner. This young man may have been one of the emperor's own children, and he was not killed by an outside enemy. He was killed by an order that came from inside his own bloodline. The chamber itself confirmed the horror. It was not shaped like a tomb. The dimensions matched a confinement cell. The positioning of the skeleton suggested the young man may have been held in that underground space while still alive, kept there for weeks, possibly months, breathing in the dark below the feet of his father's clay army before the end came. Stress markers in the bone structure were consistent with prolonged confinement under difficult conditions. Here is what history tells us about what came immediately after the first emperor died. His second son seized the throne. Historians have long suspected that the consolidation of that power involved the systematic elimination of every sibling who could present a credible challenge to his claim. Not one or two rivals, all of them. The LiDAR scans found multiple additional voids matching the exact dimensions of this chamber, distributed at measured intervals around the central mound. Same shape, same depth, same deliberate placement beneath the level of everything else. An entire generation of royal children, erased, buried alongside the workers and the political prisoners and the scholars who had built their father's eternal kingdom. In the eyes of the man who took the throne, they were all equally dangerous. They were all secrets. And secrets, in the world the first emperor created, belonged underground. The scrolls. In sealed chambers near the emperor's primary burial location, Lin's team found something they had not expected to still exist after 2,000 years. Bamboo scrolls. The preservation work required to handle them was extraordinary. temperature and humidity had to be controlled within fractions of a degree. Exposure to wrong atmospheric conditions for even a few minutes could have destroyed them permanently. The process of opening them safely took weeks. What those scrolls contained, when they were finally read, was not a catalogue of imperial achievements. It was not a monument to glory. Historians who worked through the texts described it afterward as reading a record of crimes. One document recorded an imperial decree ordering 460 scholars and intellectuals to be buried alive, not executed, buried. Their offense was maintaining philosophical and historical frameworks that the emperor had not personally sanctioned. Ideas that implied other legitimate ways of organizing human society were possible. That his particular form of power was not the only kind. The existence of that idea was, in his view, sufficient justification for removing the people who held it from the surface of the earth permanently. Other scrolls documented the systematic burning of books across China. Not political texts alone. History, philosophy, science, medical knowledge, the deliberate, organized destruction of any recorded human thought that could give someone a conceptual framework for questioning absolute authority. When a regime burns books, it is not afraid of the books. It is afraid of what the books make possible in the minds of the people who read them. Some of the most unsettling documents were confessions, signed by engineers, builders, and craftsmen who had worked on the tomb complex itself. Read the charges against them. Some were accused of harboring critical thoughts about the emperor's methods, others of insufficient speed in their work, others of associations with people who had themselves been accused of something, the chain of accusation extending outward in every direction with no logical endpoint and no threshold of evidence required to activate it. The confessions were extracted, recorded, filed, and then the people who had signed them went into the ground alongside the thousands who were already there. Every person who ever worked on that construction site was being watched. Every action was subject to evaluation. Every relationship was a potential liability. One wrong word, one moment of visible hesitation, one accusation from a colleague with something to gain, and you stopped being someone who worked on the emperor's tomb and became part of the tomb's foundation. When Lin stood in silence and heard historians read those texts aloud inside the complex, he said something shifted in the way the clay soldiers looked to him. They stopped being extraordinary artwork. They stopped being symbols of military power or cultural achievement. They became what they had always actually been, a permanent garrison standing in perfect formation above a place built on enforced silence, keeping watch, making sure the silence held. The scrolls also documented the immortality expeditions in detail that secondary historical accounts had only partially captured. The emperor dispatched entire fleets carrying thousands of young men and women to search for a legendary island at the edge of the known world, where a potion capable of defeating death was said to be kept by immortals. Those ships never returned. The most uncomfortable interpretation of their disappearance is not that they were lost at sea. Some historians now believe they were deliberately prevented from returning, because coming back without the potion would mean standing before the court and publicly confirming what every rational person already knew, that the emperor was mortal, that he was aging, that he was going to die like every other human being who had ever lived. The news that he was not going to live forever was information he could not allow to circulate. So the ships that vanished may have been silenced for exactly the same reason everything else in this story was silenced. And then there were the passages in the scrolls that no one has fully translated even now. Certain sections appear to describe a process for animating the clay figures, for bringing the army to life through breath and intention. Whether that language was intended as literal instruction or as ritual symbolism embedded in ceremony is still being debated by scholars. What is not debatable is this: the emperor genuinely believed it. He was not performing theater for his court. He believed, with the conviction of a man who had spent his entire life bending reality to his will, that at the right moment his clay army would rise. And the scrolls describe one more thing. Beneath the main burial chamber, in a room that no modern excavation has ever located, a treasury. Gold and precious objects on a scale that the ancient texts strain to contain in language. The scans detected it. A massive empty space approximately 3 full stories in height, positioned directly below the central palace floor. It appears to be real, and the scrolls come with a warning attached to it. The treasure is bathed in the poison of the stars, the poison that guards everything. That phrase, the poison of the stars, is almost certainly a reference to Mercury, and Mercury is where this story arrives at its final and height. Most dangerous chapter, at the absolute center of the entire underground complex, sits a location that no one has ever opened. No archaeologist, no government official, no researcher at any level of authorization, no one. The main tomb of the first emperor of China has been sealed for over 2,000 years, and it remains sealed today, not because no one has wanted to open it, because people who understand what is inside it are genuinely afraid of what happens if they do. Soil. Samples taken from the ground surrounding the central burial mound do not show mercury levels that are slightly elevated above natural baselines. They show concentrations that are hundreds of times higher than anything that occurs in nature under any geological circumstance. Ancient written accounts describe the architects of this tomb engineering rivers of liquid mercury, flowing continuously through a scale replica of the emperor's palace inside the burial chamber. A miniature empire built in silver, running forever beneath the ground, while the real empire decayed on the surface. For a long time, those accounts were treated as legend. Exaggeration that had inflated with each retelling across the centuries. The soil readings confirm that the core of the story is not legend. It is documentation. If the main chamber were opened today, if that 2,000-year-old seal were broken, the pressurized atmosphere that has been building inside it for 22 centuries would vent outward in seconds. Mercury vapor at the concentrations indicated by the soil data is acutely toxic. Lethal exposure can occur within minutes at concentrations far lower than what the data here suggests. What would begin as the most significant archaeological excavation in the history of the modern world could become a mass casualty event before anyone had time to respond. And that is not the only threat. In the 1980s, researchers opened a smaller subsidiary pit for the first time. They watched, in real time, standing right there, as the paint on the clay soldiers began peeling away within seconds of contact with open air. Colors that had survived in perfect condition for over 2,000 years were gone before anyone could intervene. The change in pressure and humidity triggered an irreversible chemical reaction that no preparation could have stopped. If the emperor's primary chamber contains wooden structures, silk textiles, or painted surfaces, and the ancient accounts say it contains all of these, then opening the tomb risks erasing the very history it contains. Discovery and destruction would happen simultaneously. Lin's scans of the central structure only deepened the situation. The data matched the ancient descriptions with a precision that removed the possibility of coincidence. But one conclusion was unmistakable. This place was engineered to stay sealed. The mercury, the mechanical traps, the crushing depth, the layers of burial and stone, these were not incidental features. They were a designed system. The emperor knew, with the logic that had served him across an entire lifetime of strategic thinking, that someone would eventually try to reach the center. He prepared accordingly. So far, the world has respected that design, not out of admiration for the emperor or his intentions, but because the researchers who understand this site understand the consequences of opening a chamber that was built to remain closed. The Terracotta Army is not a monument, it is a lid, and beneath it, beneath 8,000 clay soldiers, still standing in perfect formation facing east, across 22 centuries, lie the workers buried where they died. Political rivals erased from the historical record. Scholars executed for the content of their thoughts. Princes murdered by a brother who needed them silent. And at the very center, sealed in mercury and darkness, whatever truth the emperor considered so dangerous that he engineered its protection to outlast him by millennia. Albert Lin walked into that site as a scientist, a researcher trained to read data and form conclusions supported by evidence. He left with evidence that confirmed what the ancient accounts had long implied and what the silence around this site had always suggested. One of the most visited archaeological wonders on Earth may also be one of history's largest documented crime scenes. Not because of what the emperor built, because of what he buried, and who he buried with it. Here is what stays with me about all of this. The clay army faces east. It has been facing east for over 2,000 years, not moving, not aging, just standing in perfect formation in the dark, keeping watch over something the man who placed them there was willing to kill for, willing to kill thousands for, to make sure it stayed hidden. And here is the question that Lin could not answer when he left the site. The things the emperor was most desperate to protect are still down there, untouched, sealed. Who? What does it mean that we now have the technology to see them and we still choose not to? Is it caution? Is it respect? Or is it something closer to what the people who have always lived near this site have always said about it? That some things that were sealed for a reason, and the fact that we now have the power to break that seal does not mean we should. Drop your answer in the comments. And while you are there, if this changed the way you think about what history is actually built on, about what gets buried and what gets remembered and who makes that decision, share this video, because the truth about this site is still being uncovered one scan at a time. And the final chamber has not been opened yet.